I was born in southeast London and went to secondary school, comprehensive secondary school, with a view to leaving school and becoming a teacher. I had a bit of a disastrous experience in Middlesbrough. I was hoping to become a geography and PE teacher. But the incident that took place was on a playing field, and I was umpiring a cricket match. And cricket isn't my sport. And I made a bit of a faux pas in umpiring, and it caused uproar. And I realised really that wasn't going to be the profession for me. So I left university, came home, and it was that was the spur to me thinking about joining the police. Why did you want to work for the police force, Peter? What was happening at the time, and you'd have to understand this was really the headline in the news for a considerable period of time, was the hunt for Peter Sutcliffe, who was referred to as the Yorkshire Ripper. So there were some horrific crimes being committed in and around Yorkshire. I felt that this was an area that perhaps might best suit my skills, and so I decided to join the Met Police. I had the opportunity to apply for Special Branch, whose specialism was in counter-terrorism. And I was successful in getting into Special Branch. The mass killings that I first became aware of were those perpetrated by the IRA. If I say the Brighton bomb, that may mean something to some viewers, it may not. This was an attempt, it was a sort of modern-day Guy Fawkes attempt at blowing up the British cabinet. In particular, the target was Margaret Thatcher at the time, who was the Prime Minister. And they were holding their annual party conference in Brighton at the Grand Hotel. And a bomb exploded during the night, killing 6 people. And so that then led to the essential operation, and it's the most successful operation in the history of Special Branch, which is over 100 years. And we were tasked to travel to Carlisle as a team, and where an individual called Peter Sherry had come across from Northern Ireland, and he was being monitored. He arrived in Carlisle, stayed the night in Carlisle as we did, and monitored his movements. He subsequently met with another individual. Now, at that time, as a result of the intelligence that had been gleaned from the hotel bombing, a man had been identified with his fingerprints on the documentation at the hotel as a man called Roy Walsh. Well, this was a pseudonym for Patrick McGee, known as Chancer McGee, or Fingers McGee, because he had some fingers missing on one of his hands as a result of a miscalculation with some bombing equipment. Patrick McGee was then the most wanted man in Europe. So we were briefed via the Home Secretary, do not, in relation to Peter Sherry, who'd come across from Northern Ireland, do not lose this man. When you get you get that sort of license as a police officer, and as a young man at the age of 26, when you get a license like that, you know how important the job is, but you know you've also got the opportunity to apply the spirit of the law, not stay with the letter of the law. And that applied nonetheless, because once we identified that this was Patrick Fingers Chancer McGee at Carlisle railway station, they got on a train, and we thought they were going to get on a train to London. That was the obvious choice, but they didn't. They got on a train to Glasgow. Fortunately, that day I'd been allocated the fastest car, and I was thrilled by that. And arrived on the ramp, which was the mail ramp at Glasgow station, just as the train was pulling in. So I was the first officer on arrival in Glasgow, and I was aware of that because of the speed of my vehicle, and the others were catching up. And I was able to then take over the lead for the surveillance of the 2 individuals that had come off the train The two individuals then went into Queen's Park. Now, this is a large open area with a few ponds, and this was potentially very, very exposing and very dangerous. So I chose at that time, it's the only time in my police career, I chose at that time because we were all armed, to release the Smith & Wesson revolver from its holster, which underneath my arm, to hold on to the gun in my anorak pocket, primed ready, should I need it. And it was shortly after that they entered a tenement building in Glasgow, and where there were, I think there was about 4 or 5 other flats. And then we sealed, together with Strathclyde Police, who took over at that point, we sealed the building off. And it was a matter of time before all of the flats were raided to see which one they were in. And the intelligence that was gained from the flat was enormous. One part of the intelligence was that a bomb was already primed to go off in Rubens Hotel, which was alongside Buckingham Palace, to take out the side of Buckingham Palace. And so immediately that was searched. And the bomb was eventually found after repeat searches. And in addition, there was a whole list, I think it was about 14 or 15 seaside resorts, largely in the south of England, where targets of bombs were listed, and the dates for those bombs were listed to go off, together with an ammunition dump that was nearby. This was a very successful operation, and it resulted in a private audience from Queen Elizabeth, who invited the team, but unfortunately the powers that be decided that a small representative sample would go to the palace, which they did. It wasn't me, but they did.
And after that experience, why did you decide to leave the police force?
I suppose on surveillance and other areas of work that I was engaged in Special Branch, I spent an enormous amount of time observing people, and observing in particular perpetrators of serious crime. And it was during those moments when, for other members of the public, they were just seeing an individual on the streets with complete, for obvious reasons, complete ignorance about what they were up to. Whereas I had an awareness about where they were coming from, what they were trying to do. I wanted to have much more of an understanding about what was in their minds, what was motivating them to be doing what they were doing. And that curiosity took root and didn't go away. I chose to undertake a training in psychotherapy, psychoanalytic training in psychotherapy. That lasted, in essence, about 7 years in total. And given the experiences I'd had to date and the challenges that I felt I could respond to, high security it was. And so I was invited to go to Broadmoor Special Hospital. And I then continued working in Broadmoor for 15, 16 years.
What is it like working at Broadmoor compared to, I suppose, the stereotypes that there might be about Broadmoor as an institution?
I felt it was a privilege, first of all, to work in Broadmoor. Broadmoor contained and contains the most damaged individuals in society, the psychologically damaged individuals that have had almost universally horrific, deprived backgrounds themselves, and have ended up committing the most serious offences. Obviously, the most notorious serial killer in Broadmoor was Peter Sutcliffe. So, in many respects, the circle had turned completely.
Why did you become interested in analysing mass killings?
The number of mass killings that were taking place in the US was increasing, and I became rather tired, I think, of the annoyed almost with the rather sort of simplistic labels that were given as to why these individuals were committing the crimes they were. It almost felt a laziness on the part of the press to jump from one sort of sexy label to another to understand what might have been going on, because it seemed to me that there was often the individual that was committing these mass killings may well have been appropriating, whether it was religious, cultural, sociological, may have been appropriating all sorts of areas of life to justify the killings that they were making. And I wasn't convinced by that. I looked at the largest mass killing in the UK, which is the Dunblane massacre.
And for anybody who doesn't know about the Dunblane massacre, can you just give a little overview of what actually happened in Dunblane and I suppose the significance of the time in the UK?
It was in March 1996, and an individual, he was 43 years of age, Thomas Hamilton, lived alone. So he was the classic loner profile. He visited his mother the night before, who lived not far away, to spend the evening with her, having tea, having a bath, and unbeknownst to her the following day, chose to then walk into Dunblane Primary School and kill 16 children around the age of 5. Most of them the age of 5, one was the age of 6, and a school teacher as well.
And can you tell me a little bit about your research into Dunblane and what you did discover in that analysis?
Yes, I've always worked on the with using the anecdote of a combination lock, because I was rather intrigued initially with it's Professor Brian Cox who suggests that life on Earth is a unique set of circumstances that come together at a particular time. A whole range of different circumstances come together at a particular time to make life possible on Earth. Equally, there is something not dissimilar to a whole range of different circumstances that need to come together for an event like Dunblane to be committed. So it's like a combination lock where you get a whole range of different numbers, and it isn't until the last number snaps into place that the murderousness is then enacted. And so with Thomas Hamilton, what I learned was that from the moment he was born, his father left him and had nothing to do with him for the rest of his life. His ongoing experience was one in which he became progressively ostracized and isolated, marginalized within his community. And this is not to blame his community. This was how people felt as a result of his personality. Now, what I began to think about was how this had already been experienced by him originally by being completely disowned by his father. And his father's the role of the father, where ostensibly the father should be the protector, the provider of security, love and support, he had been completely taken away from him, leaving him with feelings of deep shame, humiliation and anger that perhaps even he wasn't aware of. He knew in himself that he required an intervention, no different to the intervention that could have been provided by his father originally by being present. But he knew he needed intervention to help him cope. And so 6 days before the atrocity, he wrote a whole range of different letters, including one to the Queen, his MP, local councillor, school headmasters, and so on, and ostensibly saying that he is desperately seeking an intervention, in order to reclaim some self-esteem in the community. So he knew what he needed. He failed to get any response from any of his pleas for an intervention. Of course, the victims were the children, but by extension, the victims were also, in a very profound way, the living parents of the children. And it's worth holding in mind the importance that he would probably have attributed to that in getting back at parents that originally was his own parents. So there was an inevitability that he would enact into the community the very struggle and unprocessed trauma and background that he had. I began to research, in my own way, subsequent mass killings. At the time was the court case in Norway for the mass killing that had taken place there by Anders Breivik. He felt very much feminized by the whole process of being reared just by his mother and subsequently his sister. But the father was largely absent. And the shame that he felt as a result of that, he wrote very copiously about. He produced a manifesto prior to the atrocity. I think he published it on the same day as the atrocity. He stated, because his parents separated and divorced very soon after his birth, he stated that should his manifesto become law, so this is magical thinking in his part, that he would change the law to ensure that all children from divorced parents always live with their father. So he seemed to have some sort of quite unconscious awareness of the importance of what he'd missed. And so he really illuminated that deficit in his own life. So that was the largest one in Europe. The largest one in America, a man called Stephen Paddock. And he, and this was 2017, I think, and this was in Las Vegas, and he killed over 60 people and injured over 500, I think, which was a horrific incident. But his template and antecedents are exactly the same. And in all of the cases in terms of the mass killings that I've highlighted, it is that one number on the lock, the absent father, that everybody continues to refuse to take account of, but is so crucially important. The absent father is the individual that both by his actual physical absence is an absent father and has nothing, rather like Thomas Hamilton's father and Anders Breivik father and others, who have actually nothing to do with the ongoing everyday life of their son. That's an absent father. An absent father is also a father that's very much present, but very much present in being a toxic, abusive presence in the home along the lines of domestic abuse. That is an absent father in the sense that it's an absent, potential, benign, loving and supportive father. It is a very much present, malevolent father, but it's an absent father in my language.
And can you tell me a bit about your thoughts on one of the UK's most recent mass killing attempts, which was that of Nicholas Prosper?
Nicholas was the second of 4 siblings in a family, and he was living with his mother, no father, living with his mother and 2 other siblings, 2 younger siblings, a younger sister and a younger brother. And he was apparently progressively becoming again quite isolated in his own home. The individual that became almost imprisoned himself in his own room with prodigious online activity, with video games and the dark web and so on. He had a plan apparently that was to kill his family, and then if he got the timing right, to go on to a local school and to become the most notorious mass killer in UK history. by killing as many children as he could. He was hoping for 30 plus. That was his aim. On the night, he purchased a weapon. Grave issues to be addressed in how he managed to do that by falsifying a firearms certificate. Early hours of the morning, with a practice round, shooting a teddy bear in his bedroom to see whether he could handle this weapon. That then seemingly woke his mother. She confronted him. He shot her in the head. This then disturbed the other occupants of the house, his sister and his brother. His sister was apparently cowering underneath the kitchen table, and she was shot in the head. And his brother then tried to flee, as I understand it, but was challenged, and then he was horrifically stabbed, I think, over 100 times. So that's a frenzy. Stabbed over 100 times before he was then shot too. He then left the building, and he, because this happened not in the timing that he'd hoped, it was much earlier in the morning as opposed to later on when he hoped the school might be opening, that he could go from the house to the school. And I think about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, he just had to hang around until I understand eventually, seeing the police vehicles that were called by neighbours to the noise that had been happening, he approached the police officer and gave himself in. Why would an individual do that if he had the full intention of going onto the school? That showed a reasoning in his mind that the game was up, as opposed to avoiding the police, which he could have hidden. And so that's what intrigues me about it, that there was the capacity in his mind to reflect on the circumstances at the time, as opposed to being really driven to achieve his initial aim.
What are the similarities between Nicholas Prosper's attempted mass killing and other mass killings that you've studied?
We have to be very cautious. Mass killing is 4 and more. This was 3. However, I would, for the sake of semantics, I would agree that this was a mass killing in the making, with the intentions that he had in going from his house to the school, even though he prevented himself from enacting that. The similarities. There's only one similarity I can extrapolate because I have such little information to be able to say definitively with any clarity. But there's only one similarity, and that was him seeking validation, seeking the sense of belonging to a community online of like-minded individuals, and seeking validation in a way that made him feel that he was relevant to somebody and some others. So this sense of belonging is so crucially important, and the validation. And so the online part of that was, I feel, a very important area.
Is it possible for us to prevent future events of mass killing? And if so, how can we do that?
If we are all in the same camp that we're wanting to prevent further victims from happening, we need, whether it's in medicine or in science, we need to understand the causes of the incidents that have occurred. And the causes of the problem means that we also have to look at the history of the perpetrator to understand what it is that might be being repeated on the one hand, and to understand what might have driven that individual as a result of his own experience to commit the horrendous crimes that he's committed. That is purely in order to ensure we put issues in place, policies in place almost, to prevent, as opposed to try and pick up the pieces afterwards, but to prevent further mass killings and killings from occurring, and violence, incidentally, because right across society we have so much violence occurring. we haven't got it right yet. We've got some way to go. But unless we take account of it and take account of the causes, then it will just go on and on.